There is a precise moment, invisible to everyone around you, but felt in the marrow of your bones, when the first half of a human life ends and something else begins. Carl Jung called it the crossing of the meridian. The moment the sun of your psychic energy stops climbing and begins its slow, terrifying, and necessary descent into the interior. Most people experience this as a collapse. Jung recognized it as the opening ceremony of the greatest chapter a human soul can inhabit. If you are watching this video, understand something. In the realm of the unconscious, there are no accidents. You did not find this by chance. You found it because something in you is already standing at the threshold, already sensing that what you have been building, performing, and defending is no longer enough. That underneath the structure of your current life, something ancient and essential is pressing upward, demanding to be born. Jung spent 40 years studying the second half of life, the phase he called individuation, and what he discovered was extraordinary. Before the golden era arrives, before the person you were always meant to be finally walks into the world, the psyche sends a series of precise, unmistakable signals. They do not arrive as celebrations. They arrive as disruptions, as losses, as a sudden, inexplicable inability to keep pretending. Most people mistake these signals for breakdowns. They panic. They run back to the mask, back to the performance, back to the version of themselves that the world rewarded. But the rare few, the ones who will eventually live a life that gives them goosebumps, they recognize these signals for what they actually are. Evidence. Evidence that the golden era has not simply begun. Evidence that it was always inevitable. Today, we are going to explore the 6 powerful and specific signs that Jung tells us always appear before a human life undergoes its most magnificent expansion. If you recognize yourself in even 3 of these, you are not failing. You are being forged. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that has no name in our modern vocabulary. It is not the tiredness of overwork. It is not the burnout of someone who has pushed too hard for too long. It lives deeper than that. It lives in the part of you that has been performing not just at the office, not just at social gatherings, but performing the fundamental act of being a particular version of yourself for so long that the performance has become indistinguishable from the person. And one day, without warning, the energy required to sustain that performance simply runs out. Carl Jung called the structure behind this performance the persona. He borrowed the word from the Latin term for the clay masks worn by actors in ancient Greek and Roman theater. These masks served 2 purposes simultaneously. They projected a specific role to the audience seated in the Colosseum, and they acted as a physical megaphone, amplifying the actor's voice so it could reach the very back rows. The mask was functional. The mask was necessary. But the mask was never, under any circumstances, meant to be confused with the face beneath it. Jung observed that every modern human being constructs such a mask. It begins in childhood, built almost unconsciously, piece by piece, as we learn which version of ourselves receives warmth and which version receives silence or punishment. The child who learns that being agreeable produces safety will spend 30 years perfecting agreeableness. The child who learns that achievement produces love will chase achievement long after love has ceased to be the actual reward. By the time we reach adulthood, the persona is so finely crafted, so convincingly real, so deeply integrated into every interaction we have with the world, that we have entirely forgotten the original act of construction. We look in the mirror and believe we are seeing a face. We do not remember that we are seeing a mask. The persona is a utility, not an identity. And the moment you forget that distinction, the moment you begin to believe the mask is your actual face, you have begun to die from the inside out. For years, perhaps decades, this mask served you magnificently. It got you the career. It earned you the relationships. It won you the approval and the safety and the status that the first half of life requires. It was a genuine achievement. Jung never dismissed the persona as a simple lie or a shallow vanity. He understood it as a necessary negotiation with the collective. The persona is how you made a deal with the world. The deal was this: I will be the version of myself that you can tolerate, and in exchange you will give me a seat at your table. For a long time that deal felt worth it. But there is a law of the psyche that Jung spent his life documenting and that no amount of social conditioning can override. The self, the totality of who you actually are, the vast and intelligent unconscious that existed long before the persona was constructed, does not stop growing simply because the mask has been perfected. Beneath the surface of your professional composure, beneath the smile that arrives on cue and the language that has been polished smooth, the real person keeps expanding, keeps deepening, keeps pressing outward against a container that was built for an earlier, smaller version of you. And one day the container cracks. The first sign that your golden era is beginning is this precise, unmistakable moment of psychological bankruptcy. Jung used that word deliberately. Think of your psychic energy as a currency. Every time you smiled when you were actually grieving, every time you said yes to a project that bored your soul to its foundations, every time you suppressed a radical idea to avoid the discomfort of being different, you paid a tax. A small withdrawal from a reserve you didn't know was finite. For years you ran a hidden deficit. You borrowed energy from your future, from your health, from your unlived dreams, to keep the performance of your current life running smoothly. Then one day, without theatrical announcement, the bank of the subconscious closes its doors. You aren't losing your edge. You aren't burning out. Your soul is on strike. It has realized that the vessel of your current life is too small for the person you are becoming. You know this has happened to you if you recognize the following. You sit in meetings and the language everyone else speaks fluently sounds like a dialect you never truly learned. You go to a social gathering and find yourself watching the room from a strange, quiet distance, present in body, entirely absent in spirit. You look in the mirror and see a person who is competent, presentable, and completely unrecognizable. Not because you have changed physically, but because the mask has finally become too heavy for the spirit beneath it to support. To your boss, to your spouse, to your colleagues, this looks like a crisis. They will say you have lost your edge. They will wonder if you are burned out, depressed, difficult. They will offer solutions designed to help you return to the version of yourself they depended upon. And every one of those solutions will feel, in the deepest part of you, like being asked to climb back inside a coffin and pull the lid shut. But in the Jungian architecture of the soul, this is not a crisis. This is a subconscious rebellion. This is the self, the totality of your psyche, the force that knows infinitely more about your purpose than your ego ever will, intentionally withdrawing its investment from your old life. It is divesting from the persona because it needs that energy for something far more important. It needs it to build the sovereign self. The version of you that doesn't need the mask. The version of you that will eventually look back at this moment of bankruptcy and recognize it not as the end of something, but as the first morning of everything. The persona must go bankrupt before the real person can afford to live. The mask must shatter before the face beneath it can finally breathe. You are not failing at life. You are failing at being a character in a play that was never written for you. And that failure, that precise, sacred, terrifying failure, is the first and most powerful sign that your golden era has already begun. There is a ghost living inside you. You have known it was there for a long time, though you have worked very hard not to look directly at it. It lives in the part of you that stirs when you pass a bookstore and your eyes land on a subject you once loved but abandoned. It lives in the sudden, inexplicable ache you feel when you see someone doing the work you always told yourself was impractical. It lives in the dreams that visit you at 3 in the morning. Vivid, specific, insistent. About a life that looks nothing like the one you have carefully and responsibly constructed. Carl Jung called this the unlived life. And he made one of the most unsettling observations in the history of psychology about what happens to it. He said it does not simply vanish because you chose not to live it. It does not dissolve quietly into the background out of courtesy for the decisions you made. It goes underground. It retreats into the shadow, where it ferments in the dark with extraordinary patience. And when you approach the threshold of the golden era, when the persona begins to crack and the soul starts demanding its real inheritance, the unlived life stops being patient, stops waiting, stages a coup. This is the second sign, not a gentle nudge, not a quiet suggestion, a coup. Jung famously wrote that nothing has a stronger psychological influence on a person, and on the people around them, than the unlived life. He observed it most viscerally in his patients whose children were unconsciously burdened with the weight of the dreams their parents had never dared to pursue. But what most people miss in that observation is its personal dimension. The unlived life does not only haunt the next generation. It haunts you. It lives inside the architecture of your own psyche, pressing against every wall you built to contain it, growing more insistent with every year you spend ignoring it. Think about the trades you made in the first half of your life. They were not malicious. They were practical. They were the necessary compromises of a person trying to survive, to belong, to build something stable in a world that rewarded conformity and punished eccentricity. To be accepted, you may have folded your radical and rare personality into a conventional shape. To be secure, you may have buried the nomadic spirit that wanted to move through the world without a fixed address. To be loved, you may have silenced the creative vision that felt too strange, too ambitious, too exposed for the people around you to hold without flinching. You didn't delete those parts of yourself. You simply put them in the basement and locked the door. And for years, the arrangement worked. The basement stayed quiet. Life proceeded along its planned trajectory. But the basement was never empty, and the lock was never as strong as you believed. As you approach the golden era, the suppressed parts of your psyche do not simply knock politely at the basement door. They begin to seep through the floorboards. They appear as irrational urgencies that your ego cannot explain or justify. A sudden, consuming obsession with a language you have never spoken. A hunger to create something with your hands when your entire career has been built on words. A pull toward a philosophy or a spiritual practice or a way of being in the world that contradicts everything you were professionally rewarded for believing. You find yourself standing at office windows, staring at nothing, feeling a gravitational pull toward a life that has no name yet, but whose direction is unmistakable. To the ego, the part of you that manages your calendar, protects your reputation, and calculates risk, this feels like a midlife crisis. It feels like instability. It feels like everything you worked for is being threatened by an irrational and irresponsible part of yourself that clearly cannot be trusted. The ego will attempt to diagnose this urgency, medicate it, schedule it away, or at minimum defer it to a more convenient season that never arrives. But Jung would tell you something different. He would tell you that what your ego is calling a crisis is actually a recruitment. Your own soul is recruiting you. The unlived life is not sabotaging your carefully constructed existence. It is offering you the raw material for the only existence that will actually sustain you through the second half of your life. Because here is what Jung understood about wholeness that the modern world has entirely forgotten. The goal of psychological maturity is not perfection. Perfection requires the exclusion of everything inconvenient, everything messy, everything that doesn't fit the image you have been paid to project. Wholeness requires the opposite. It requires the integration of everything you left behind. The unlived life is the collection of all those missing pieces. It is the gold you dropped in the dark because you believed, at the time, that it was too heavy to carry while you were climbing. You were wrong, and some part of you has always known you were wrong. This is why right before the golden era arrives, so many people experience a grief that seems to come from nowhere. You grieve for the artist you didn't become at 20. You grieve for the risk you didn't take at 30. You grieve for the conversations you never had, the borders you never crossed, the versions of yourself you abandoned at the side of various roads because someone told you they weren't viable. That grief is not weakness. It is not nostalgia. It is a vital and necessary signal. It is the unlived life demanding to be mourned so that it can finally be integrated into the person you are becoming. You are not just remembering the past. You are reclaiming the energy that has been trapped inside it. The world will tell you it is too late. It will call you a late bloomer as though that phrase carries an apology inside it. But Jung taught us that the most magnificent trees are those that grow the slowest. The unlived life is not evidence of your failure. It is a reservoir of untapped power that has been gathering pressure for decades. And the moment you stop running from it and start listening to it, it stops being a ghost. It becomes the architect of the greatest chapter you have ever lived. The coup has already begun. The only question is whether you will resist it or finally let it win. There is a specific kind of loneliness that arrives before the golden era that has nothing to do with being alone. You can be surrounded by people who love you, people who have known you for decades, people who would do anything for the version of you they remember, and still feel it. It is the loneliness of being invisible to the room you are standing in. Not because they stopped caring, but because the person they are caring for no longer fully exists. You have outgrown the reflection they are still trying to give you, and the mirror, for the first time in your life, has stopped showing you yourself. Carl Jung called this the breaking of the social mirror, and he considered it one of the most necessary and most terrifying passages a human soul can move through on its way to the golden era. From the moment you were born, you used the people around you to know who you were. This is not a flaw. This is not vanity or weakness. It is the natural and inevitable structure of early psychological development. As an infant, you looked at your mother's face to understand whether the world was safe. As a child, you watched your teacher's expressions to understand whether you were capable. As an adolescent, you measured yourself against your peers to understand whether you were worthy. The faces of other people were the first mirrors you ever had. And for most of human history, they were the only mirrors available. By the time you reached adulthood, this habit had become so deeply embedded in your psychological architecture that you no longer noticed it operating. You simply lived it. You made decisions based on how they would be received. You shaped your ambitions around what your circle could recognize and applaud. You calibrated your language, your appearance, your opinions, and even your private thoughts to remain legible to the people whose reflection you depended upon. You were not directed by an inner compass. You were directed by the consensus of the room. And for the first half of life, that arrangement was not only acceptable, it was efficient. The social mirror told you who to be, and you became it. But here is the law that Jung discovered. The social mirror can only reflect who you have already been, cannot show you who you are becoming. It has no capacity for that. The people who love the current version of you built their image of you from everything you have shown them across years of shared history. That image is real. It is loving. And it is, at the threshold of the golden era, catastrophically out of date. As the persona begins to crack and the unlived life begins its invasion, you start to change at a speed and at a depth that the social mirror simply cannot track. The people around you are still reflecting back the competent professional, the reliable friend, the person who always knew what to say and how to hold the room together. But you are no longer entirely that person. Something new is pressing through. Something that has no name yet and no established social role and no guaranteed place at the table. And when you look into the faces of the people who love you, searching for confirmation that this new thing is real, you find only confusion. You try to explain what is happening inside you. You reach for the language of the transformation, the withdrawal of energy, the grief of the unlived life, the strange and vertiginous feeling of becoming someone you don't yet recognize. And you are met with blank stares. Or worse, with the well-meaning advice of people who want you to feel better, which always amounts to the same thing. They want you to go back, to return to the version of yourself that they understood, to stop unsettling them with this new frequency they cannot match. This is the moment the mirror shatters. And when it does, the loneliness that arrives is unlike anything you have previously experienced. Your phone stops ringing as often. Invitations dry up. Conversations that used to feel effortless now feel like physical labor. A constant translation between the language of who you were and the language of who you are becoming, with no guarantee that the person on the other side speaks either dialect. You may begin to withdraw voluntarily, not out of depression, but because the performance of social interaction has become too costly. Pretending to be your old self in order to keep your old relationships comfortable feels, in Jung's precise language, like a betrayal of the self. Jung observed that no significant psychological growth can occur as long as you are constantly being verified by the outside world. As long as you are looking for your reflection in someone else's eyes, you are, in the most fundamental sense, a slave to the mirror. The ego's entire sense of reality depends on external confirmation. Remove that confirmation and the ego experiences it as annihilation, as freefall, as the terrifying, untethered sensation of existing without a net. But the self, the deeper, vaster, more ancient part of your psyche that has been orchestrating this entire transformation, does not experience it that way at all. The self experiences the breaking of the social mirror as liberation. Because the mirror, however loving, was also a cage. It was a ceiling on your becoming. Every reflection it gave you said, in effect, this far and no further. This is who you are. Stay here where we can see you. Jung called the space that opens when the mirror breaks the telos a sacred, enclosed territory where the alchemical work of transformation can take place without the interference of the collective. The isolation is not a punishment. It is a protection. The subconscious has drawn a boundary around you not to imprison you, but to keep the noise of the world out while the music of your future self is being composed inside you. You will know the stage is nearing completion when you notice a particular shift in how you carry yourself through the world. You stop explaining. You stop trying to make the people who knew you understand the person you are becoming. Not because you are angry with them, not because you have stopped loving them, but because you have realized, with a quiet and unshakable certainty, that understanding is no longer what you need from them. What you need, what the golden era requires, you can only find in one place now. In the interior, in the silence where no mirror can reach. In the part of you that existed before anyone else's opinion of you was ever formed. The mirror had to break so that the window could